Okay, so let's get started. Hopefully everyone is ready to go. First thing we need to do is open up our terminal. So open up your terminal and CD to wherever you do your work, your project. So I'm going to CD to my desktop just because that's the easiest spot. And let's get a couple packages installed before we actually start programming. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need to install Webpack. So go ahead and do that first. Okay, once you have that ready to go, the next thing we're going to need is gulp. So make sure you do that. The -G, if you're not sure, it means for global. So what we're doing is we're installing these packages globally on our machine, kind of like you would install regular software on your machine. And that's the difference. So make sure you do that. And last but not least, we want to install the Turbo CLI. So go ahead and do Turbo CLI. Like that. Now, even if you already have the Turbo CLI from before, like let's say you did a previous tutorial, do this again anyway, because we're doing updates to the CLI. Whoops, I forgot the sudo, so let's try it again. Like that. So it should have been like that. So do this again anyway, because there are updates happening to the CLI roughly once a week or so. So at this point, we are on this version number, 0.15.28. So if your version number is less than that, then you need to update. So if you're not sure, just do turbo version, and it'll give you the version number. Okay, so make sure everyone has that ready to go. And then next thing is head over to turbo360.co and create an account. Just scroll down to the bottom and create a free account. It is free, so you don't have to worry about that. And we're going to use Turbo for our hosting environment. So when we deploy our project to our staging environment, it will be on the Turbo environment. So you need an account to do that. So make sure you have that, and we should be all set to go. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is going to create the project. So that's going to be Turbo new, and then Instagram clone. Like this. And when I do that, this is going to create a Node Express project that's configured in a way to deploy on Turbo. So it's basically a regular Node Express project with a couple config settings that makes it very easy to deploy on Turbo. So you don't have to do that yourself. So next thing you want to do is this creates the project in your workspace. So for me, that's my desktop. You want to CD into that. And then you want to run npm install. So you want to install the package dependencies so that your project is ready to go. Okay, and when it's done, it should look like this. Next thing you want to do is you want to run the project on the dev server. So you want to do turbo dev server like this. And this will run the project on localhost. So you can confirm that everything worked or didn't work. So you see how it says listening on 3000. What you want to do is head over to your browser, localhost 3000, and make sure you see this. Excuse me. So this is the project we just scaffolded. It's, again, a very, very, very simple Node Express project that Turbo just generated for you out of the box. So that's the idea here. So if you confirm that that worked, that means your project is ready to go. The next thing we want to do is create a corresponding version on your Turbo account so that we have a staging environment that we can deploy to. So we want to do that right away. So head over to your Turbo account. And over here is where you will see your Turbo projects. If you just signed up, obviously you won't see these. You're going to see a set of instructions. So over here is where you create your projects. So I'm going to call this Instagram clone, like that. And now I have a staging environment for this project. What I'm going to need right now is the app ID. So just go ahead and copy that. And then head over back to your terminal and then do turbo app and then paste in the ID just like that. And what this will do is connect your local source code to your staging environment on Turbo so that we can deploy, which is going to be the first thing we're going to do so that we can make sure everything works on local and on staging. So go ahead and do that. Okay. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is Turbo login from your terminal because you have to be authenticated from your shell to make sure you can deploy. So go ahead and do that and then log in with the credentials that you used to sign up just now. And then last but not least, you want to do turbo deploy. And this will deploy the project, your local project, to your staging environment on your Turbo account. And this way we can confirm that everything works on both the local environment as well as the staging environment. So once this is done, usually takes about a minute. So when the deploy is complete, you'll see it says right here, deploy complete. It gives you a staging link, which is actually a live link on the internet. So if we copy and paste that into your browser, we should see the same output as we saw on localhost. So what that means is the entire scaffold worked on local and on staging. So the environment is properly configured for both. So we're ready to begin programming, which is good. Everything is all set to go. So this is what we're confirming right here. So once you have that ready to go, we're ready to begin actually programming. So let's go ahead and open up the actual source code. So I'm going to use Sublime. So let's open this up in Sublime. And here is the default scaffold that Turbo generates for a new project. Like I said earlier, it is a very conventional Node-Express project. It's pretty much the simplest Node-Express project you can put together. It uses the Mustache templating engine, which is very much like Handlebars, and those templates are in the views directory. So if you go back to your terminal and run the dev server, and head over to localhost 3000. What you're currently looking at is a template inside the views directory, specifically the index.mustache template. So that is this guy right here. So this is the HTML that loads on the home page, and that's the index.mustache file. The app configuration is inside the package.json. Again, it's just a conventional Node-Express project, so this is where you expect to see it. As you can see, it's very, very simple, so there's not much in here. It's a very simple scaffolded project. And then the app.js is where the actual Express project is set up. If you've done any work with Express, this probably looks familiar. But this is much simpler. It's a much stripped down version of a Node-Express project. Right now, what really matters are these 4 lines right here, where we set the routes. So the index route right here is the one that that renders the home page. So if you look at where it is, it's in the routes folder in the index file. So if you look at the routes folder index file, you will see the route that is responsible, that is responsible for loading this page right here. So, okay, so then this route in particular, line 9, is the one that loads the home page. And these other routes are just sample routes. We're not going to use these. Let's go ahead and get rid of these because they're just going to get in the way right now. And let me just make this easier to see. Okay, so, whoops, that was what happened. All right, so here is the simplest index route right now. I'm going to get rid of this JSON object as well. And we're going to pass in null like this. And then also, just to break things down a little bit more granularly, this function that's being passed in, it really should be like this, because really we want to use ES6 instead of ES5. So it's a subtle detail, but it's worth pointing out that we want to write as much ES6 instead of ES5. So the default scaffold gives you an ES5 function here, which is really a little bit sloppy on my part. We really should change that into ES6. All right, so if you're not familiar with Node Express, what you're looking at here are arguments, one called request and one called response. And these are they're pretty much what they sound like, a request, an HTTP request, and then the response right here. The response object dictates what the user sees in response to the request. And as you can see on line 9, the response is going to render the index mustache file right here. And that's how we determine what page shows up here. That's how that's determined. And that's routing. That's how we handle routing in Node Express in a very simplified way. I removed this object here for a reason, because I want to show you how we use these routes and templates, mustache templates, to render dynamic data. So if you take a look at the index mustache inside the views directory, you'll see pretty much the HTML and the content you see here pretty much as is, with a couple of minor exceptions. If you look at here where it says text inside the double braces, that is a mustache placeholder. That's there to render dynamic data. So what that means is this text can be whatever we determine from the route file. So if we go back to the index route file, we can create an object called data and pass in a key called text. And let's say this is Instagram clone. So here, the value of this text, which is Instagram clone, will show up inside these double braces as long as we pass in the data, which we haven't done yet. So we want to pass it in like that. And then if we run the dev server, well, the dev server is still running, so I can just reload. You see here, right here, it says Instagram clone. And that text is determined by the data object we passed in to the template. And which is why we use mustache templating, because it makes it very easy to inject dynamic data. So if I add another key, like greeting, I now have access to another key in the data that I can use in the template. So if I go back to the template, instead of welcome to Turbo, I can do a reading inside the double braces. And that way, whatever I type in here is what will show up inside here, creating a dynamic rendering capability inside your templates, which makes it very, very convenient to show dynamic data. And that's how we do this in Node Express with the Mustache templating engine. So hopefully you got that working so far. We're going to take heavy advantage of this when we start rendering Instagram data. So if you're having any trouble, please let me know in the chat section so hopefully we can debug. But so far it's pretty straightforward, I hope. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this, all of this index.mustache stuff. Let's get rid of the whole thing. Except this little doc type. It's not really important, but it's worth leaving behind. And let's code this from the bottom up. So I'm going to create an HTML tag for this template. And then we're going to create a head tag. And then a body tag. Okay. Inside the head tag is where we import our CSS and set some meta tags and things like that. I would imagine by now most of you understand that. So we're going to import Bootstrap. So head over to Google. Let's do Bootstrap CDN. And let's make sure it's Bootstrap 3. Or actually, Bootstrap comes already inside the Turbo scaffold, so I forgot that. So let's use the one that comes inside the scaffold. If you look at the public CSS, the Bootstrap CSS is already in there, so it seems kind of silly to import from the CDN. So let's do let's see. So link like that, and then the href is where we tell where the file path is. Which brings me to my next point. The public directory is where all the static assets are configured in your project. Static assets are pretty much what they sound like. So CSS files, JavaScript, images, things of that sort. You know, anything else like audio files, video, they all go here. So this is a pretty standard directory structure for your static assets. We're going to use the Bootstrap from the CSS directory. Notice how we don't do public CSS. We don't do that. We don't want to do that because the static asset directory is by default the public directory. So you don't need to specify it here. In fact, you shouldn't specify it. It'll break the link. So you want to just do that. And then inside the body tag, let's set up header 1 tag. Let's do Instagram phone. And let's make sure that looks the way we expect. So here it is. So far, so good. I'm going to use a Bootstrap class called container. This just gives me a little bit of padding on the margins. It's not really that important, but it's worth using Bootstrap. The advantages it provides because, you know, why not? We have it, so may as well use it. So here is the initial layout, and then we're going to create a series of rows and columns, just like you would expect to see on Instagram. So here is the Instagram feed of my local YMCA. You see how there's a grid structure, 3 across, 3 columns across. So we're going to create a similar style, right? So let's create the structure for that. So within a Bootstrap CSS architecture, these would be called stored in a row, and each one of these would be a column. So let's go ahead and set those up right now. So we're going to set up a row. Like that. So that's a row, which is visually what it sounds like. It's a horizontal row. And then within those rows, we want to set up columns. So I want to set up a column right now. Now the row and column structure in Bootstrap, it's pretty simple. Basically, a row consists of 12 possible columns. And depending on what column you specify, the numerical value, it determines the width of that column. So for example, if I do a column 6, then what I'm saying is I want the column to occupy half of the row. It'll occupy half of the page. If I do a column 3, then the column will occupy 1/4. 3 out of 12 is 1/4. So if you look at the structure here on the Instagram page, we have 3 columns, which means we want a column 4 because 4 goes into 12 3 times. So really we want call MD4. Don't worry about the MD for now, I'll explain that later. But here, we set up 3 equal-sized columns, and notice how when you add them all up, you get 12. It'll occupy the entire row, which is generally what you want. You want to occupy the entire row. So then inside, let's do H2, column 1, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so here I'm just illustrating how the Bootstrap column and grid structure is organized. So if I reload, you'll see column 1, 2, and 3. Just like I explained, 3 equally distributed columns across the entire row. And that's a quick rundown of how the Bootstrap column and grid structure is organized. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but this is a quick sort of a cheat sheet version of that. So we're going to take advantage of that to create a similar visual structure here. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is, let's see here, let's set up the request for getting the Instagram data. So the question then becomes, how do we actually get this data to load into our page, right? So what we're going to do is make an API request to the Instagram API to access this data and then render it on our side. So we're essentially using Instagram as what's called a CMS, which is basically just a source of content. The question then becomes, how do we actually get that content? So we're going to do that right now. So if you actually punch in this literal Instagram URL and then make the following adjustment, remove that backslash, and then do that. So it's question mark, underscore, underscore. Make sure you see it's 2 underscores, a equals 1. If you make that request, you'll see that you get this huge jumble of text. This is called the JSON response. What you're looking at is the JSON data of the Instagram page we were just looking at. So this Instagram page right here is rendering this same JSON data right here. So it's making the same, it's rendering the same data. It's obviously very, it's not clear to see that, but it is the same literal data, just rendered in a different visual structure. In this case, JSON. So you can confirm that by clicking on some of these like thumbnails, and you'll see that here, this image right here is the first image right here. So it's loading the same data. So what we want to do is make this request on our project and then load the data, render the data on this template using whatever visual configuration we want to use. The reason we're making this request is because this JSON object is very, very conventional. It can be consumed by any sort of client side. So it's a standard structure that we can rely upon to parse the data. So, which we're going to do after we make the request. So the first thing we need to do is actually make the request. So let's go ahead and set that up first. So what we want to do is go back to our terminal and turn off the server for now. That's Control-C. And then we need to import an NPM library, which will make the request on our behalf. And the library I'm going to use is called SuperAgent. So the first thing we want to do, the next thing we want to do, is import the library SuperAgent. And notice how this time we're doing -s instead of -g. That's because in this case, I don't want to install the library globally on my machine. I want to install it locally on the project only. So that's what's happening here. So that's the difference between -s and -g. And SuperAgent is a library, an NPM library, which makes HTTP requests for us. So we can use that to make that Instagram request I was showing you a minute ago. So let's go ahead and do that. So first thing we want to do is import the SuperAgent library inside the index route. So head over back to your index route and import the SuperAgent library that we just downloaded. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is create a separate route. Let me explain why. If you go back to the Instagram example I was showing you earlier, you see how it says 14 Street Y right here, and that determines what Instagram account to show. If I do a different account, obviously I'm going to see a different set of images. I would imagine that's pretty obvious. So we want to create a similar request path structure so that we can do localhost 3000 slash 14 Street Y, whatever, and then it'll show the Instagram feed of that account. We want to create a similar URL structure. So that's what we're going to do right here. So here, I'm going to create, I'm just going to answer this question from CRS1Pi real quick. So he's asking a good question. Would you normally use a controller for this? I would actually normally use a utility class. Actually, I can just answer this speaking. I'm still getting used to this whole chat stuff, so I'm sorry. CRS1Pi, yeah, I would normally use a utility class that abstracts the library into my own to do this, because I might want to switch out the library. The reason I'm not doing that here is for two reasons. Number one, for thoroughness. I want to, rather than install the library, rather than just reuse a utility class, which I would normally do, I want to show people how I build it from the bottom up. And number two, it's more about simplicity. So I want to make sure that I don't want to overcomplicate things. The utility function I would normally use for this is actually quite complicated, where you have to adjust headers and things like that. And I really don't want this to get that deep down that rabbit hole. But you raise a good point. Normally this would be abstracted. That's correct. So, but again, this is a beginner intro course. That's why. Okay, so I'm going to create a new route like this. Yeah, I'm still getting used to all this whole chat style. This is my first YouTube live thing, so please bear with me. Here I'm creating a new route, and I'm going to call this username. You see how there's a colon right here? That colon indicates to Node Express that this is a request parameter. That means whatever I type into the URL, that is the username parameter. And we can confirm that real quick by extracting the username from the params, like that. And then I'm going to return, I'm going a little fast, excuse me. So I'm going to return JSON like this instead of rendering a template. Open those parentheses and then open a JSON object like this, and then let's do a confirmation. And then return the username right back to the client side. So what this means is when I make a request to this path, whatever username I enter into the path will be returned right back to me. It's kind of like a boomerang. It'll just shoot it right back with the username inside the confirmation object. So if we run the dev server again, oops, I made a typo on line 25. Let's find that. So line 25. So yep, I forgot that. Okay, so somehow I had mistakenly removed that curly brace. Hopefully you didn't make the same mistake, but this is how it should look. And then if we go to localhost 3000, we still see what we have here, but if I do localhost 3000 and then 123, you see how it returns a JSON object with whatever I entered in here, right? So I can confirm that this is a more dynamic way of rendering data, right? So now I can use that to make the following Instagram request, which I'm going to do here. So whatever I type in here is what request will go out to here, giving us a more dynamic way of rendering data. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So here is where we want to use the super agent library to make the request. So the next thing we want to do is create the Instagram API. And that is going to be this right here. So for now, just copy and paste the original example. For now, we're going to hard code that because I want to make sure that we're using a reliable source of data. Okay, and then we'll change it later once we confirm that. And then we're going to use the super agent library. So comment this out. We're done with that. And we're going to use the super agent library to make a request, a GET request to the Instagram API endpoint. We have to do a couple configuration options here. So we're going to do that. Let's set. It's telling super agent that we're expecting a JSON response, which we clearly are right here. And this is the callback. So here, if there is an error in the callback, what we want to do is render a JSON response to our client side saying that the confirmation was unsuccessful. And then we want to include an error message. Now, hopefully, we won't see this at all tonight. Hopefully, there won't be any errors, and that's that. And if it's successful, then the actual payload comes inside the response object right here. So what we want to do is send a JSON confirmation back saying success, and then data, and then the actual data is stored inside the body key like that. And this is a super agent configuration thing. It will return the payload inside the body key. So now if we make that request right here, hopefully we'll see some Instagram data. So here, pay close attention to the URL. So the URL is localhost 3000. We're not actually on the Instagram website. We are on our website. But then our website made a successful request to the Instagram API and then rendered the data from the API on our page. So super agent is making the request for us, and then we are in turn rendering the data from Instagram on our project, our server. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully it worked on your end. This is probably the pivotal point of the entire project. So if you don't have this working, then nothing else will work afterwards. So make sure that this part is working for you. And if not, shoot me a message on the chat, and we can figure it out. But obviously, without the data from the Instagram, then none of this is going to work. So that's where we are right now. So next thing I want to do is use the dynamic capability here. So right now we hard-coded the username, right, just to make sure it works. So we've confirmed that. So now let's go ahead and make it more dynamic. So we want to get rid of that now, and then put in the username parameter from the request, like that. This way, whatever you type into the URL is the username that will go to Instagram. And that way we can make more dynamic requests. So let's try that. So here's the username that I've been using as an example so far. Here it is. So far, so good. I'm going to grab another account. This is a friend of mine he's a singer-songwriter. So let's go ahead and put that in and see if we get a different set of data, which we do. So now our request is dynamic, which means we can make dynamic requests for Instagram data. Oh, Ryan, the Chrome plugin, yes. So good question. So your data might look like this, which is obviously not very easy to read. So let's go ahead and Chrome JSON formatter. It's this one right here. So if you want your JSON to look like mine, just go ahead and add this Chrome plugin, and you should be set to go. It makes it much easier to read. So okay, cool. So we're good with that. So now we have a method of creating dynamic requests, which is better than not, obviously. So what we want to do next is take these JSON responses, and we don't want to render just the raw JSON, right? We want to render the actual Instagram feed. So what we want to do is we want to parse out the actual Instagram data, the image data from the callback, so that we can see. Let's see here. Let me take a look at this. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to here. We're just returning the raw JSON from Instagram. We're basically just proxying the request from Instagram onto our account, onto our project, which just confirms that it works. But now we need to render the actual data visually inside of a template. So what we want to do is render it onto the index template that we prepared earlier. But this time we want to pass in the response.body from the Instagram API so that our template has access to the API data from Instagram. And then we can render it like we did over here in the initial example. So if we make this request again, we now see what we saw earlier. But this time, the template has access to all of this data right here, right? So we can now use that to populate the template any which way we want to. So if we take a look at the user object, the user has a full name key. So we have user dot full name, which we can render inside the template. So if we go back to our template here, instead of Instagram clone, we can just render the user's username or full name, right? So if we go back to the index.mustache, here is where it says Instagram clone, right? We can just get rid of that and do user.full name like that. And that is in reference to this key right here. So let's see if that works. And there it is. And I'm going to try it with the other account just to make sure that works as well. Perfect. So now we've confirmed visually that our data is rendering in the template from the Instagram API call. So that's obviously a step in the right direction. So let's just make sure everyone else has that too. Okay. So now that we've confirmed that the template can render data from the Instagram call, let's go ahead and start rendering the other data. So if you look back here on the API, the JSON API, we have the user key, which has a media key right here, which has a nodes key right here, and this is where the images actually are. So it's kind of a weird naming convention, but that's how they structured the actual data. So the images are here. So if you see there's a thumbnail, SRC, thumbnail resources, caption, comments, things like that. So what we want to do is drill down to that, the user.media.nodes, and that's where the images are. And bear in mind, this is an array. So looping through an array in Mustache is a little bit different. So it's not complicated, but it's just a little bit different. So let's go ahead and set that up. So first thing I'm going to do is get rid of these columns. Inside the template, except for one of them. So here, I left one behind. And we're going to loop through that media.nodes key. So let's go ahead and set up the user.media.nodes. Now inside of an array, if we want to loop through an array in Mustache, we add a hashtag right there, and then we close it with a closing tag like that. And everything inside is a loop. So we're looping through the array inside that. So we can take this column 4 and we can do it like that. So what this means is this column 4 will be rendered as many times as there are items in the array. So in this case, I think the default value is 20. So this will happen 20 times. So if we just load this, we should see the column 1 grid show up 20 times, or I guess 12 times. Yeah, 4 times 3, 12 times. So that means the loop was successful, right? So we successfully looped through the array. So make sure you have that working on your end as well. And each element of the array, so if we go back here where it says nodes, this whole thing is the first element of the array. So every JSON object inside the nodes array has a lot of content. So we got to decide which content we want. So we're going to use the actual media preview, no, thumbnail src right here. So if I click on this, yeah, here is the first image of his account, on his account. Actually, I'm going to go back to this one. So thumbnail src is the thumbnail, right? So we can grab that and then we can remove this h2 tag and render an image instead. But here we want to render the thumbnail src key value. So we do thumbnail src. And that should be it. That should be good enough. So if we re-render this, now we get all the images. I go back to the YMCA example. Okay, but the images are humongous, right? Because the thumbnail is not formatted or anything. So clearly it works, but now we're going to work on some visual structure. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, let's try adding a div. Putting the image inside of a div, and then inside the div, let's do width. Let's do 90% on the width so that it doesn't occupy the entire column. So let's try that. Or better yet, I think this would be better. Let's try this instead. Padding. Let's try 24px on the padding. That way we'll get sort of equal padding around all the edges. And then inside the image, let's do style equals width 100. So let's see how that looks. Okay. Good. All right, so then if I try another account, perfect. Now things are very like better laid out. Things are more visually structured, more organized. Let's see here. If you look at the actual Instagram page, things are more sort of centered. If you can see, there's much more margins on the left and the right. So I'm going to create a similar structure here. So instead of going all the way from left to right, I'm going to squeeze it down a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that using more Bootstrap classes. So here, let's see. I'm going to create a row. I'm going to do nested rows in here. So inside this row, I want to create I want to create a column inside this row that only occupies 8 units out of the 12. So it's going to take up only 2/3 of the row's entire width. So creating more of a thinner appearance. And then inside that, I'm going to create another row. And then these individual images will render inside that row. So I'm nesting some rows here. It's a little confusing, but it's just keeping track of stuff, that's all. So then here, it's more narrow, but you see how it's to the left, right? We want to center it off, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So what we want to do is create an offset. So inside the outermost row, we want to do call offset MD2. We want to create an offset value, which will move everything over 2 units to the right. And that's the intended effect here, except I think I spelled it wrong. So it's just offset MD2. All right, let me look this up. Oh, I reversed it. So call MD offset 2. Okay. So the idea here is that by making it the outermost column a column 8, the we're only occupying 8 of the 12 possible columns. To create an even sort of a centered effect, a properly centered effect, by moving everything over by 2, that'll position the 8 columns in the middle. So we have 2 here, 8 columns here, and then 2 here, and that all adds up to 12, and that's the math that takes place. So it's 2, 8, and 2 makes 12, which occupies the entire row, and then the 8 in between is the actual content. So that's the idea behind this right here. So it's not a perfect replica, obviously. So we can make a few adjustments. Instead of 24, let's try 12. And then let's get this header inside the same thing, inside the same centered area. So what is the effect of nested rows? No, so here, I just use the nested rows as a convenient way of having one big outer column of 8. So there's one row of 8 that centers in all the content. And then the nested row in here, this one, is for the convenience of just doing call MD4s just repeatedly forever. and it'll just create it'll create that natural grid row structure here, without having to figure out where to set the next row and the next one and the next one. So it's just a convenient way of giving me this grid structure quickly and without doing any actual computation on my end. So that's kind of what that's sort of the magic of Bootstrap. It'll just do that for you. Let's see here. Oh, let's get this guy inside that center spot as well. So that's going to be inside here. Okay, great. So now we have slightly more faithful to the Instagram UI, and then I'm going to test it on another account. Oh, they just posted, because this wasn't up a second ago. So that's cool. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, cool. They must have just posted this 39 seconds ago. Huh. Okay, so let's start filling this out a little bit more. So let's get some of this data inside as well. So let's see. This looks like it's going to be another row over here, right? So we have another row with a call, probably a 4 and an 8. You see that? Because it's a 1 to 2 ratio. I don't know if you can see that. It's 1 to 2 ratio, right? So that's 4 and 8. So that's how those numbers are computed. So here, let's do another row. And then inside that row, we want to do 4 and 8. So here is the 4, which is the placeholder for the image. That column right there is what will be occupied by this image, and the 8 is this over here. So in other words, the username should be inside the 8. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So we moved it over, and then we left some space over here for the image. So now we got to go back to the JSON to see where that image is rendered, where that image key is stored. So let's go ahead and find that guy. So here is the JSON feed for the 14th Street Y. Profile pic URL looks like our best option. And there it is. So this is the image that is currently rendering this guy right here. So we know what key we want. We want the user key dot profile pic URL right there. We used to have an HD version as well. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's go ahead and render that guy. So inside here, we want to render that right there. So we want the user key dot profile pic URL, and that's how we figure out where the data is stored. So now we have that showing up, and then that's showing up over here. It's kind of hard to see with a white against white background. So what I'm going to do is inside this body tag, I'm going to give it a slight off-white background. So okay, and that'll give me some contrast between the image and the background color. So let's see here. Now let's create this rounded effect. So I'm going to take the image, give it a style, border radius 50%. Okay, so there's that. If you look closely, it also has a slight sort of border around it. So let's go ahead and do that as well. So border 1px, that's certainly a solid border. And it looks like it's like this off color right here. ED is like a hex code for a very light gray. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect, but we're getting pretty close to it. Okay. And then let's start filling out this stuff. I'm not going to worry about this follow button. You know, it's just one thing I'm going to leave out, but let's get all this other stuff in there because it's pretty easy to get that data rendered over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the font match a little bit more closely to this right here. So let's see what they're using. No reason why we couldn't just use these exact values, right? So I just did an inspect. Here is the actual tag that's rendering the username, and here are the CSS attributes for that tag. So I'm just going to reuse those because why not? So here we're going to do style. That wasn't supposed to happen. Okay. And let's see how that looks on our end. It's not a perfect match. Actually, I'm rendering the wrong data. You see how it says 14th Street Y, and here I'm getting 14th Street Y. So that's a minor adjustment, but I'm sure you can figure it out. But let's go ahead and just fix it anyway. 14th Street Y. So that would be username instead of full name. I did full name initially. That's what's showing up here. In actuality, it should be username. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Okay, so it's not a perfect match, but it's quite close. And then let's go ahead and render this subsequent data down here. So we're going to do, let's see here, what's the best way to do this? We're going to do a row and then another row for each one. For this whole thing right here will be one row, and this will be another row, and that's it. So let's go ahead and do it, organize it that way. So let's do right here is the username. Let's do 2 rows. Okay, and inside the first row, it's gonna render these 3 objects right here. So let's do class call md4 491 posts, 1025 followers. So let's try 491 posts and 25 followers and 769 following. So 769. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, so instead of column 4s, let's try column 3s. All right, it's not perfect, but it's going to go with that for now. Actually, let's see how it looks with 2s. Nope, that will not do. Okay, and then you may have noticed that this text, the actual numerical values are a little bit darker, so we want to put that in a strong tag. Okay. And that will take care of this row right here. That's good for now. And then instead of a row right here, we can just do a regular p tag for this. So I'm just going to copy and paste this data. Okay, and then now let's render this data dynamically. I am going to add a style here and create some margin on the top. Try 24. Cool. So I'm sure you noticed by now I've been hard coding all this data, so that's no good. So let's go ahead and render it dynamically. So like, for example, if I use the other account that I've been testing against, my friend's band, right, it's still showing the YMCA stuff, right? So that's not good. All right, so let's go ahead and fix that. So here we have 491 posts. So 491 count. That is the count object. Oh, went too fast. Inside the media key. Yes, okay, so we want to right here, we want to grab the user.media key and then the count, and that should be the value from here. So let's go ahead and make sure that that still renders 491, which it does, but then let's try the other account, which should be 387. 387, good. So we got the right value, so that's good. And then let's see, 1025 followers, so 1025. Okay, so that is the user followed by and then count object. So let's do user. Followed by and then count. And that should give us the same value here. So 1025. And 2013. And then last but not least, the following. So that's 769 of this guy, so it follows, and then dot count. So user follows and then count. Okay. Okay, good. So now we have this row of data properly accessing the JSON from here. Let's take care of this. So 710. See. Oh, biography right here, simple. Okay, so then here we can just do user.biography right here. Okay, and there is that. And let me test it with the other account. And there's that. Cool. So the data is now being properly rendered. Let's see. So for now, I'm going to cut it off here. What I'm going to do in tomorrow's session is we're going to add this nav bar on top. We're not going to plug in the functionality, so like this search stuff and whatnot, we're not going to plug that in, but we're just going to plug in a simple nav bar. And then the next thing we're going to do is configure it so that when you click on this, it'll show the actual individual post with the caption, and we'll get all this other data in there as well. And that'll be tomorrow's objective. So, and then that should pretty much finish our Instagram clone example. And maybe if there's time, we'll do this infinite scroll. I didn't actually even realize this was on here. So maybe we'll do that tomorrow or the next day as well, depending on how fast we move. So that's going to be it for today. So hopefully you get all this working. The last thing I want to do real quick, actually, before I wrap it up, is I'm going to deploy this back to our staging environment. Because obviously we want to make sure it works on staging as well. All right, so it's all set to go. Let's go ahead and copy that. And you can just use your localhost example and remove the localhost 3000 and paste in the staging link from the terminal. And it should give you the same results. And let's try the other one. Cool. And so it looks good. Everything is properly working. So like I said, tomorrow we're gonna connect the nav bar, and we're gonna do a few other things. I'm not really sure why we're not getting the emojis here, so I'll figure that out tomorrow. Like connecting these individual images to unique pages for those images, and maybe the next day we'll do that infinite scroll. That would be a pretty cool feature to make sure that works as well. So hopefully you got everything working. This video will be on the website, so let me know if you have any questions or if you missed anything. You can just check it out on the website, and it'll be up there. And yeah, that's it. So tomorrow, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard, and hopefully I'll see you there. So thanks for watching.